We've known this for a while, for a very long time, for all of our lives. But suddenly, the realization that you only live once has taken on a fierce urgency. You only live once, the acronym YOLO, was popularized by the rapper Drake in 2013. But now, after 14 months of the pandemic, and as we are emerging from the pandemic, YOLO is a call to action. New York Times columnist Kevin Roose wrote a piece last week called "Welcome to the YOLO Economy." And he tells the stories of millennials who look at their lives, how they're spending their days, and they look around the world, and they look at their own existence and at all of our existence. And they realize it's tenuous, it's precarious, it's ephemeral, it can change like that. And inspired by the fact that you only live once, they decide to change up their lives. For example, Bruce tells the story of a guy who worked hard, years, worked hard to become a partner at a big law firm in Florida. And now he's a partner. He's attained the promised land. He's a partner. He spent 7, 10 years working to be a partner. Now I'm a partner. Yay. And the pandemic happens. And he finds himself working 10, 11 hours a day at his kitchen table. And he realizes that he doesn't like what he's doing. And he realizes, YOLO, you only live once. And so he decides to give up the big firm partnership that he's worked for years and to start a boutique small firm with a friend. Ruth tells another story of a woman who is a newspaper reporter, and her beat is the pandemic. And she lives in Brooklyn. And she tells the story in article after article about how people are dealing with the pandemic in Brooklyn. And she finds herself fried. And she realizes, you only live once, and I'm utterly exhausted from this. She quits her job as a reporter. She stops writing about the pandemic. She decides to leave Brooklyn. She moves to her own promised land, Sarasota, Florida, where her parents live, where the sun is shining. And she starts devoting herself to two things she'd always wanted to do: painting and kayaking in the sunshine. YOLO. You only live once. So if you're not living the life you want, change it up now so that you can live the life you want. And my question this morning is, what does Judaism have to say about YOLO? What would our tradition say about this instinct that since you only live once, it might be a good idea to bring fresh eyes and fresh possibilities and fresh thinking to the big question of what am I going to do with the rest of my life, and maybe change it up in a big way. So our tradition has something to say. When the Israelites leave Egypt, the Torah says, V'chamushim alu v'nei Yisrael, that the Israelites leave chamushim. And in context, what chamushim means is armed, carrying arms, carrying weapons so that they can defend themselves. But in a famous midrash, the rabbis do a wordplay, and they see a double entendre in chamushim. It means that the Israelites left carrying arms, but chamushim sounds a lot like chamesh, the meaning of which is the number 5, and chamushim means 1/5. And this midrash teaches that only 1 out of 5 Israelites actually chose to leave Egypt. Fully 4 out of 5, fully 80% of the Israelites, when they finally had the chance to leave slavery, and they could finally chart out for a new path, they said, I think we're going to stay behind. The devil that we know is better than the devil that we don't know. The devil that we know, even if it's slavery, is better than the devil that we don't know if it means the insecurity of freedom. This midrash gets at a very central truth of the human tradition. More than we know what we like what we know. More than we know what we like what we know. We like our patterns. We like what is. We like the familiar, and we don't like change. Inertia weighs 1 billion pounds. And it's really hard to resist the force of gravity that is 1 billion pounds of inertia. And so this midrash invites us to think about when we're at a juncture point in our lives and emerging from the pandemic is that point. Do we want to follow the example of the 80% of the Israelites who preferred slavery, who preferred to be doing what they're doing, who surrendered to inertia? Or do we want to be the 20%, the 1 in 5 Israelites who said, you know what? I'm going to leave what I know, and I'm going to take a risk for a better future. And that obviously raises the question, when is a risk worth taking? And if we look at this story, we can deduce 3 simple guideposts to when a risk is a risk worth taking. 1, a risk is a risk worth taking when it's in service of a noble ideal. When the Israelites left, they were pursuing a noble ideal, namely freedom. They're going to leave slavery and be free. If you're thinking about making a change and taking a risk, what is the noble ideal that you're going for? Number 2, a risk is worth taking if it's not only about you. It can be about you. It can be about you. But it shouldn't be only about you. When the Israelites left Egypt, those 20%, it wasn't only about them. It was also about their being a covenanted people to God and transmitting that covenant medor ledor from generation to generation, down to Roxy and Warren's bar and bat mitzvah this morning. It's a generational commitment, not only about them. If you take a risk, if you make a change, who else is going to get benefited by that change? And here's the third thing. A risk is worth taking if it's going to alter the arc of your story. When the Israelites left, it altered their arc. It altered the arc of their story. They were they were slaves unto Pharaoh in Egypt. Avadim hayinu leFaro b'Mitzrayim. And now they are servants of God at Sinai. Shavuot coming up in a couple of weeks. If you take that risk, if you make that change, does it alter the arc of your story? Does it change the story of your life and make it a story that you would rather tell? So those are the 3 guideposts. As we're emerging from this period, thinking about changing up our lives, noble, not only about me, alters the arc of my story in a way that I want it to be altered. Let me give you an example of what this looks like in our own time. There's a woman named Jessica Bruder who was a reporter, and she had a comfortable life. She lived in a comfortable home. She had a comfortable job writing articles. She had a comfortable job teaching journalism to other students. And she could have kept doing this comfortable life, getting this comfortable paycheck, going to her comfortable home forever. But there was a restlessness that was growing within her. Jessica Bruder did not only want to write stories. She wanted to be a story. She wanted to occupy a foreign world, become a part of it, get to understand it very deeply by living it, and then by telling the story from the inside out. And there was one particular issue that called out to her, kind of a niche issue, but she just was seeing a lot about it, reading a lot about it, wondering a lot about it, and she was saying to herself, I got to do this from the inside. And the issue was that in America today, there are a lot of people, a lot of our fellow citizens, are living in their vans. They're van dwellers. Their house is their van is their house. And they spend their days driving the highways and byways of our country. And she was wondering a question about it. Is this lifestyle glamorous? Or is this lifestyle grungy? And she had read social media posts that portray living in a van as glamorous. Here I am, parked on a beach. Here's my van. My van is on the beach. My feet are in the sand. I'm going into the water. It's gorgeous outside. Guess what I don't have? Guess what I don't have? I don't have Zoom. I don't have emails. I don't have bosses. I don't have meetings. I don't have deliverables. Guess what I do have? Freedom. Living in a van. Amazing. And she wondered about that because she also saw another side to this whole van thing, and it scared her, which is increasingly a lot of people, especially as they were seniors, growing into retirement, started living in vans because they lost their homes, and they lost their jobs, and they lost the lives that they had known. And what would it be like when your van is your house because you lost your house? So here's what Jessica Bruder does. She says goodbye to her comfortable home, goodbye to her comfortable job for a newspaper, goodbye to teaching journalism, and she gets in a van. And for 3 years, she lives in her van. For 3 years, she drives from coast to coast. For 3 years, she drives from Mexico to Canada. She drives 15,000 miles, and she writes about it in a book called Nomad Land, Surviving America in the 21st Century. And of course, we all know that her book inspired the motion picture. The last weekend won 3 Oscars for Best Film, Best Director, and Best Actress. And so it ended up working out really well for Jessica Bruder. But I can tell you one thing. She did not know it at the time. She did not know at the time that it was going to work out when she was working at a Walmart fulfillment center, trying to eke out a modest existence to pay for her food and to live. She didn't know it at the time. She'd be sleeping, and it's the middle of the night, it's 2 in the morning. And that's the terrifying knock. It's the terrifying knock of police who wake her up at 2 in the morning and say, you're parked illegally, you can't be here, you have to go now, or we're going to tow your car. And she gets up and has to start driving, and she has nowhere to go. And she doesn't have a destination. She's just on the road again. She didn't know it was going to work out when she lived with a constant fear. And she felt this fear from the inside, and she described it. People who live in their van have this constant fear of the knock, and that the car is going to be impounded, their van is going to be gone, and they will have nothing left but their desperation. And in view of all of that, it must have been very tempting for Jessica Bruder to have joined the 80% of the Israelites. Stay with the devil you know. Very tempting to stay in her comfortable home, earn her comfortable paycheck, do her comfortable life. But something in her was claimed by this story. This was a story she had to live. And this was a story she had to tell. Noble, not only about her, and it obviously altered her arc. Now, I know that most of us are not going to do that. Most of us are not writers who are going to write a book that's going to inspire a motion picture that wins 3 Oscars. But all of us have one thing that is really important in common with Jessica Bruder. You only live once. What are you living for? Shabbat Shalom.